Hi, good day everyone. This is Joe Brent. So thank you so much for watching all my videos. So for today's vlog is I'll be explaining to you our lesson number 3 in the subject of special education. This is SPED 117. This is our lesson number 3. Okay, so we will be talking about biological and environmental causes of developmental disabilities. There are a lot of things to consider when you try to explain developmental disabilities. So I know you are all aware that there are people who are suffering from developmental disabilities. So aside from our biological causes, in this video is we will be talking about some of the biological causes and the environmental factors that causes some developmental disabilities. So we will be dealing by it one by one. So take note, I am not a medical practitioner. Okay, so in here is I'll be explaining to you a very simple way of understanding this concept, this topic. Okay, so let us start with understanding the basic concept of human reproduction. So what is human reproduction? Human reproduction talks about when you are pregnant, when by the time that we are conceived by our parents, that is our human reproduction. Heredity, it comes from our genes. We have our genetic code, our DNA and chromosome. So let's try to explain that to you in a very simple way. Okay, so what is heredity? Heredity, a very simple way of describing what is heredity is your genetic code, your genes. So heredity is the transmission from one generation to the next of human characteristic. So for example, your human characteristic, you inherited that to your parents. I have my own human characteristic, right? I have my own characteristic. You also have your own characteristic because you inherited that to your parents. That's why we are so different individuals because we possess different human characteristic, and that is the best way to explain what is heredity. Okay, so our genetic code, our genes, we inherit that from both parents, and this is called the blueprint or the book of human life. For me, why it's called the book of human life? Because we inherited that to our parents. It is given by God, and it is, for me, it is the blueprint. It is the real definition of your own human characteristic. Okay, so what is the chromosome? So when you talk about biological causes, no, the chromosome should come into 23 pairs, right? So if you are a male, you should have the X and the Y. If you are female, you should have the X and the X. That's why when you get pregnant, for women, when you get pregnant, your OB-GYN can do ultrasound and she can really tell if you are conceiving a baby boy or a baby girl. Right? It's because of the chromosome. It's because of the things that are happening in your body. That's why pregnant women should always take care of themselves because there are a lot of things happening inside their body. Okay? For example, this one. So there are principle of genetic determination. So how do we determine our genes? Number one is we can determine our genes by dominant recessive genes principle. So what is that all about? When you talk about dominant, this is your dominant traits. For example, if both your parents are very hardworking, so possibly you also have that human characteristic, very dominant human characteristic, very hard worker, a hardworking individual. So if you're both parents, they are so business minded, so possibly you also become a business minded person. That is your dominant to recessive genes principle. When you talk about recessive, if both of your parents, they are not so business minded people, so possibly you are also that type of person, not so business minded people. So if both of your parents, they are so jolly, they are so happy individuals, they are very funny to be with, possibly you also acquire those traits. This is a very simple definition of dominant to recessive genetic principle. Number 2. So how do we determine our genes? Number 2 is we have the sex-linked genes principle. So what is this all about? Diba? Take note, females should have 2X sex chromosome. 2X. Male should have X and Y sex chromosome. Okay? Characteristic is also influenced by our sex chromosome. So if you are a female, so possibly you also have that feeling of being feminine. If you are male, you also have that feeling of being masculine. Your masculinity is more dominant based on your sex-linked genes principle. That's why I am a female, right? Biologically, I am a female. So that's why I am possessing the human characteristic of being a female. For others, if you are a male, you're also possessing the human characteristic of being a female based on your sex-linked genes principle. And that is how we define sex-linked principle. Number 3 is the polygenic inheritance principle. So what is polygenic inheritance principle? This is a genetic transmission. This is our genetic transmission. This is the combination of many genes. That's why we also have those traits. That's why we are doing this way. That's why we are like this. It's because of our polygenic inheritance principle. We are inherited that from both our parents. Poly means many genes. Take note, we have a lot of genes. More or less, we have 140,000 genes. So by the time you are conceived by your parents, no, the genes of your parents is combined with the genes of your mother is already combined with the genes of your father. So possibly you are acquiring those traits with them. Okay, so we have 140,000 genes. So it is difficult to imagine how huge the number of genes, right? How it is difficult to trace all the human characteristic. That's why it's really hard to understand individuals. It's really hard to know them one by one, because we are a mixture of a lot of genes, of many genes, which is composed of 140,000 genes. Can you imagine that? Okay, the fourth one is we have the genotype and the phenotype genetic heritage. So what is genotype? So genotype, this is our genetic material. That is how we inherit that from our parents. Okay, so by the time you are conceived, by the time of fertilization, this is really you. Your human characteristic does not change by the time that you are conceived by your parents, because you inherited that from your parents. So for example, in my case, I have a dominant trait for my father. I love dealing with people, and my father is very funny talking with them. So I have also funny talking with other people. So possibly I have acquired his genotype genes. Genotype human characteristic. It doesn't change. Okay, mugawas ra jud gihapon, so it will show up every now and then. Sometimes I am formal, sometimes I am so wacky, so it really shows because of my genotype. Okay, how about the phenotype? So when you talk about the phenotype, it refers to the observable traits. Okay, so what you see to that person, possibly that is influenced by the phenotype genetic heritage, and it is possibly influenced by the person's environment. So the phenotype, you acquire that to your environment. The genotype, it does not change. It is really you. Okay, so there are a lot of things that is really happening when you try to think about our genes. And sometimes it's really hard to define and to get to know that person because of our genes, because of our differences. So there are a lot of things to consider when you talk about understanding why you are doing that, understanding others because of the things that they are doing. you think that what they are doing is right, but they also thought that what they are doing is not right. So it's quite complicated to know how things are going out with them. Okay, so let's proceed with discussing the biological causes of developmental disabilities. So when you talk about biology, it is the study of life. Okay, this is biological, this is inherited, this is within us. So why is it that there are some people who are experiencing some developmental disabilities? So let's talk about some of the terms in human sources of developmental disabilities. We have the basic terms in human production. So when the egg cell of female met the sperm cell of the male, so there is the time of conception. And by the time of conception, there is now the process of cell division, in which each pair of the chromosome in the cell separates. So there are a lot of things happening when you talk about human production or human reproduction. And that is the time of fertilization. So that's why this is what we call the fertilization time. Take note, there are a lot of things happening in human production, from conception to fertilization to creating a new life. So the critical period and developmental vulnerability during pregnancy. So when you talk about vulnerability, if you are pregnant, this is a critical period of the human development, because there are a lot of things happening inside your body. That's why you need to be careful. That's why pregnant women should always take extra precaution, so that they're very prone to experience developmental disabilities, especially if they are experiencing traumatic event, especially if they are experiencing a very hard life. So possibly they will also acquire some developmental disabilities. Okay, if they are experiencing traumatic event, so that is a critical period during pregnancy. Deviance, meaning due to some changes in the body, due to some injuries, possibly the pregnant women will also incur some problems when you talk about developmental disabilities. As what you've noticed now, there are a lot of people, or there are a lot of women who are experiencing traumatic event. There are a lot of people who are experiencing some bad things happening while they are pregnant, and it really affects the baby. It really affects the development of the baby. That's why if you go to the OB-GYN also tell us avoid stress, because stress can really hamper the healthy development of a baby. Okay, so getting pregnant is not easy. You are prone to injury, you are prone to developmental disabilities and some developmental risks. That's why if the OB-GYN would tell you to take bed rest, you have to take bed rest, because that is the only way to protect your baby. That is the only way to make the baby survive inside your tummy. Okay, so there are a lot of things happening. Even if the baby is out, or after birth or during the postnatal development, the newborn or the child, okay, if the baby is already born, the baby is already safe for injury. No, this baby can still experience a lot of injury, a lot of prone to injuries that can hamper their own development. Okay, so let's talk about the course of prenatal development. So as I know, you are all familiar that if you are pregnant, so you will experience the 9 months of carrying that baby until the baby is out. So let's talk about the course of prenatal development. Nowadays, if you are pregnant, so for women, is they need to undergo prenatal development. Own family, you should take care of your wife, especially if your wife is pregnant. So we have 3 phases in prenatal development. Okay, the first is the germinal phase. So what is the germinal phase? The germinal phase, this is the first stage, the first 2 weeks following fertilization. This is the first stage of prenatal development. Okay, so here it happens, the cell division, the implantation happens. This is the germinal phase. But what can go wrong during the germinal phase? Do you think there is a risk during the germinal phase? What can possibly go wrong? Okay, during the germinal phase, there can be abnormalities in genes and chromosome, right? So there can be abnormalities. Possibly the baby is experiencing some abnormalities when you talk about the cell division, and it is possible to transmit genetic diseases. That's why when you found out that you are pregnant, you should go to the OB/GYN to check if the baby is okay, because there can be abnormalities in genes and chromosome. The second is the embryonic phase. So this is the second month of pregnancy. So this is the second month of pregnancy. And now the mast cells are called embryo. Okay, so what could possibly go wrong during the embryonic phase? So during the embryonic phase, the cells quickly divide, right? Paspas kay siya, the cells very quickly divide, the organs, the structures, they are vulnerable to changes in the environment. Okay, so this is the time wherein the organs and the structure, they are vulnerable to changes in the environment. And some, on the second and the third month of pregnancy, they are also experiencing chromosomal abnormalities. Especially if the mother is trying to abort the baby, this is the time that the baby is greatly affected by the spontaneous abortion. Okay, so this is the stage wherein the baby is greatly affected by the things that is happening in the environment. Okay, so let's not do that, no. So if you are pregnant, it's a blessing, but you still need to be careful and not to put any pain to your baby inside, or not to do abortion, because it really affects the healthy development of your baby. The third is the fetal phase. So the fetal phase, it is the stage, covers the 7 months. So lasting from the 3rd to 9 months. So this is the last stage from the 9th month of pregnancy. So what can possibly go wrong during the fetal phase? So still, it is still critical. So there are some disturbance in normal development, especially if you are experiencing a lot of traumatic event, especially if you have a lot of stress, especially if you are not happy with your pregnancy. There are some who is experiencing unwanted pregnancy. So there is an effect with the development of your baby. Okay, so that's why some babies, they are not experiencing good environment, so they are affected by a lot of things. So they don't have a complete body structure. They can't hear. Instead of 5, 4 na lang, or 3, because of some developmental disabilities. And some cannot speak well. So possibly during the birth or during the conception, fertilization, there is already a problem with developmental disabilities. But during the birth process, do you think it's safe to say that you are okay, that the baby is okay and the mother is okay? It's still, there is a risk after or during the birth process. The birth process is very complex, and some may not proceed smoothly. It is difficult. Some experiencing a lot of struggle. Ingon pa sila during the birth process, your life is 50-50, because it is not easy to do the birth process. So it's very complex. So you are still prone to physical trauma or mechanical injury. So there are a lot of women who is really having a hard time during the birth process. That's why they will need to undergo cesarean section. Okay, but to those women who are very okay with the natural way, they can also do that. And during the birth process, there's also a time wherein the baby cannot get the enough oxygen supply. So the baby is experiencing some anoxia or asphyxia that can also damage to the brain. So take note that getting pregnant or creating a family is very complex, and it